Okay, quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is written here. It comes from completing the square on the standard form of quadratic equation. It's not that hard. If you understand complete the square, it's not that hard to derive. But that alone would take probably 10 minutes to go over. So we're just going to use it. Two things about the quadratic formula that you need to remember. For one thing, it can be used for any quadratic equation. A quadratic equation basically are equations where the highest power is 2 on the variable. But it's not always the easiest way to do it. Okay, if quadratic formula were the easiest way to do it, we would not even consider any other method because quadratic formula is unlimited in its use. But since it's not always the easiest, sometimes the square root method is easier, namely if your b value is 0, if there's not an x term, and sometimes factoring is easier. If it weren't for that fact, we would just always do the quadratic formula. But this is it. Okay, and it's taken from the quadratic equation, the standard form there. So I'm going to do a couple examples. Okay, something like this. Now, I'm going to change that actually to a 1 because those are all even. There's a little shortcut that I don't want to bother with right now. But we do want to make sure there's an equal 0 here before you declare a, b, and c. But a, b, and c, as you can see here, a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant or the number. So in this case, it appears that a is 4, b is -6, c is 1. Okay. We're going to apply those each into the quadratic formula. Again, don't declare those variables until you see an equal 0, which here we already had. So looking at the quadratic formula, x equals -b. In that case, it would be -6. Okay, that's this position. Plus or minus b squared. Very important here. Very common mistake. Probably the most common mistake I see is when there's a -b. People will just do this. They'll say -6 squared. Okay. That needs to be in parentheses, namely this part here. Okay, if you don't put it in parentheses and let the calculator compute it for you, it's going to give you the wrong, it's going to give you -36. Because calculator is going to say, well, you want to square 6 and make it negative. But no, we want to square -6. But long story short, let's always put this in parentheses. As a matter of fact, it may be a good idea to include a parenthesis here to emphasize that. All right, -4 times a times c. So 4 a times c. That would be 4 and 1. 4 and 1. And on the bottom, 2 times a. It's centered up below all that. Now, a is 4. And oftentimes, I wouldn't fool with writing 2 times 4. I would just say 8. But we'll, just for the sake of demonstration, write the whole thing out. All right, so -6, that's +6, plus or minus the square root of. Remember, this is always positive right here. Now, you may just go on the calculator and do this all at once. I'll break it up a little bit, but it's 36, not -36. 36 minus 4 times 4 times 1, which is 16, all divided by 8. And this is a good one. It's got a little bit of everything in it. 36 minus 16 is 20. Okay. That plus or minus indicates there's going to be 2 solutions. One if you were to add there and one if you were to subtract. Well, before we do either, we want to reduce this square root like we did earlier. Okay. The square root of 20 breaks down into the square root of 4 times the square root of 5. Okay. And the square root of 4 in turn is 2. Now, that is a separate video, separate idea of how do you break down 20. A lot of people just do it on a calculator, but it is 2 root 5. Now, on this last part, to present it in a standard way, if you have these three numbers here, here, and here, which are all divisible by the same number, in this case, they're all even, you can divide it. Now, it does not include the 5, because this is not 5 anyway, it's the square root of 5. We don't worry about that. But if you have all three of these numbers that are divisible by something bigger than 1, divide by it. Now, if it's only 2, don't worry about it. In other words, if this were a 7 instead of a 6, you're done. Because 7, 2, and 8 don't all have the same number that goes into it. But since they're all divisible by 2, I'm going to divide them all by 2. So 3, 1, I'm not going to fool with the right and the 1, and 4. So 6 divided by 2 is 3, 2 divided by 2 is 1, 8 divided by 2 is 4. There's different ways of writing that or demonstrating that, but that's what happened there. So this will be the way it's usually presented. And you could break that up if you wanted to into 3 plus square root of 5 over 4 and 3 minus square root of 5 over 4. So remember, the plus or minus there indicates both. I don't have time to show you a second example. I'll do that later. Quadratic formula.